Yeah, but you specialise in thoroughbreds, off-the-track thoroughbreds, and how to help bring them into work and be happy horses.
Yep, that's right.
Cool. So tell us a little bit then, Kirsty, about how you came to be doing that and what your passion really is.
So I grew up in Suffolk, not too far away from Newmarket, so I've been sort of surrounded by thoroughbreds all my life, really. And they're a breed that have always captured my heart, and I've owned thoroughbreds and I've trained thoroughbreds, and I've always loved them from that sense, but I wasn't really that aware of all the issues from racing into riding horses until I started working for the British Thoroughbred Retraining Centre. So I started working for them June 2017, so 3 years ago. And it just became quite sort of obvious, really, that people who are good horse people, they know what they're doing, but suddenly then just struggle with retraining racehorses. And what I realised is that racing's quite shut down. I think it's quite closed off to the equestrian world, and there doesn't seem to be a flow of information from one industry to the other. So people just don't understand what happens in racing on a daily basis, and therefore when these horses come to them, they change their whole world within a day almost, and you can get some quite major reactions from that. I've sort of likened it recently to our situation in lockdown, is that sudden change of everything suddenly not being everything is similar to a racehorse, that everything that they do in training is so different to what would happen on a DIY livery yard. I mean, it's worlds apart, planets apart. And then some of them obviously adapt and cope, and they are very adaptable horses. They're amazing, but some of them don't, and they need a bit of time. So that was sort of one of the things that became quite obvious to me, is that there's a real leap, and just by a lack of understanding, people were struggling with these horses. And people take on these horses out of the best intentions, they really do. All sorts of, you hear it, grooms going to take them on because they're coming out racing but they can't find a home, or their pal's got a field, etc., and they end up with a horse that actually they don't know very much about where it's come from or its history, or even down to, I don't find people even go back to the trainers and say, what injuries have they had, what routine did they have, what did they eat, what was, I think people are always a bit shocked by things like racehorses have very, very little hay in their diet. It's a very small amount, and then you bring them out and you put them on a livery yard and you stuff them full of haylage that they've never had before. So, but on top of that, where's anybody going to learn about it? I can't find any training courses. I can't find anybody who's going to tell me, and I just thought there's just a gap here, a real gap in the market to be able to offer people the understanding of the physical and the mental demands that racing places on horses, and just having that knowledge to then be able to use it to retrain them effectively. One of the biggest things you see is they come out of racing and people think, I don't want to get on them straight away, so I'll lunge them. Well, a racehorse can't lunge. It's never been round in a circle in its life, I mean, that's probably being a little bit unfair. There are some trainers now who do a bit more in the way of schooling, but the real old school trainers, they don't. They go in straight lines. And if you ever see a racehorse go on the lunge for the first time, it's a scary event, and it largely requires straight lines and corners and a lot of falling in, and then eventually they physically can't cope, and then they just have a breakdown, and then they explode, and then people then get scared to get on them, and there's that vicious circle. But if you'd understood what their muscles have been through to be trained as a racehorse, you'd never stick them on a lunge. It would be one of the last things you'd ever do, and you'd be better off schooling them large around a 40-20 arena than you would try and stick them on an 8-meter circle on a lunge line. So it's just silly things like that, really. And we go into all sorts, we go into the actual physical forces of racing and what impact that has on their muscles and the skeleton and the kind of injuries that throws up, and we look at it all in detail, and I think it just then makes you think, well, when I'm going to get on my horse, I might not do X, Y, and Z, because I realised when they ran, 3 miles around a national hunt track, quite, several times a year, they're probably not ready to do maybe what I'm asking them to do. So yeah, it's just trying to come at it from a bit of a different angle, really.
And so what do you find kind of some of the biggest myths around ex-racers and things like that you kind of help people overcome?
There's sort of two schools of thought, really. There's the myth that they're all psychopathic and will kill you, and that's not true. There are lots out there who are really quiet, and one of the reasons they don't make it in racing is actually they don't have enough oomph about them. And if you get one of those, you're really, really lucky, because they tend to be fairly easy to retrain. And I think that's sort of one of the other things, is that a lot of thoroughbreds are more backwards than people realize. They don't want to be in charge, and they don't want to take charge if they can absolutely help it. They will absolutely let you be in charge. And I think sort of the psychoticness, that reputation that they have, really does come from people asking the wrong questions of them, and it's a survival mechanism. It becomes the fight or flight response at that point, and they feel like you've put them in a position where they either physically or mentally can't cope with what you're asking them to do. And I think if you approach it right, and you get them mentally and physically in the right place, you will probably have a much easier time. But I think it's having the confidence to do that, especially if you're on a livery yard, because there will always be somebody over your shoulder who knows how to do it better than you. Then they might never have owned a thoroughbred. So I think that's one myth, that, I think from the livery or the main horse owner just thinks all thoroughbreds are just going to bolt off with you and are going to kill you. And that's genuinely not true. The other side of it is there is this quite new sort of thought that all thoroughbreds are truly versatile, and you can get them off the track and you can do anything with them. And in a sense, that is true. They are really adaptable and they're really intelligent, but depending on how long they've been in racing and what their physical issues are, that might not necessarily be true. And I think one of the things that the BTRC do, which is the rehab yard up in Lancashire, is they try to assess horses for suitability of job, which I think is really, as a real key point, that if you have a horse that's been in racing and it's raced quite hard, so maybe it's been on the flat for a couple of years and then it's gone out and done national hunt, it might have got to a point where the trainer is injecting its hocks every 6 weeks, and then you don't know anything about that. It goes to a retraining yard, it then gets sold on, and you want a dressage horse. As I say, there's this feeling that any racehorse can go out and do ROR dressage at a certain level, but I'm pretty sure that a horse that's having its hocks injected every 6 weeks isn't going to do dressage to any real level, and would probably suit being a hack horse and make a really nice hack horse. There are horses out there, that the work riders know that there's a horse on the yard that bolts with them on the gallops. You don't want a middle of the road rider to end up with that horse, but a professional could make an amazing event horse out of that. So I think they are versatile, but I think there needs to be an understanding that you can't just take any horse, give it to any person and do any job with it. I know that's probably true of all horses in all spheres, but there's a real marketing push that these horses are extremely versatile and very adaptable. And I'm not saying they're not, but I think you have to know what that horse has been through, and did it retire with a tendon injury? Why did it stop racing? What are those reasons? And I mean, I'm sure every trainer in England's going to hate me soon, because I just keep telling people, ring the trainer and ask them, what was he like in training? What did he do? Why did he stop? What was his attitude like? Because you're more likely to have a successful partnership if you get the right horse. And I think there's a real void between the two industries, between racing and people who take on ex-racehorses, is that I would suspect the majority of people who have ex-racehorses know nothing about their previous racing career. So they could have had a totally unsuitable horse for them, but it goes, you know, they tend to go through a lot of dealers and retrainers, and then it's almost like that previous history is irrelevant because they've taken the next step. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of retrainers out there who are really good at placing horses with the right people, but equally so, there aren't that many retrainers, and you've got over 5,000 racehorses retiring every single year. So a lot of people end up with freebies, horses for £1, and you know, scarily, people buy their teenagers racehorses because they're £1 and they don't come from a horsey background. And you hear that a lot, you know, it was a cheap horse, so you know, they didn't want to invest loads of money, so they bought it for £1 off somebody, which is frightening, but it does happen. So yeah, I think those are the two biggest myths.
Yeah, I think that I've certainly heard those kind of ones for sure. And interesting, isn't it, how they are polar to each other as well? You know, depends who you listen to. So,
yeah,
you know, as with everything in horses, you know, it's the right thing for the right horse for the right owner, and finding that perfect match can be a minefield no matter what background that horse has had, isn't it?
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Having heard that, then, you know, some people would be put off from going for an ROR, and others will be thinking, no, you know, actually they sound great. What would be your advice then if someone does think, actually, do you know what, I actually would really love an off the track thoroughbred. I like the idea of helping a horse that has been in that kind of background. I love the look of them, and they are beautiful, aren't they? Thoroughbreds are absolutely stunning. You know, they're the right kind of height and shape and what have you for me. It's something I'd really like to do, but wow, now I'm thinking, what a minefield. What do I do about it? What would be your advice to one of the things? Actually, yeah, that could work for me.
I think, you know, that's, as I say, one of the reasons we set up all the courses, the online courses and the hands-on clinic that we did just before lockdown, was just learn about it. Because if you know where they've been and what they've done, it's really not that hard to then work out a plan. You know, one of the biggest things is make sure the team of people you have around you are right. So having a riding instructor that knows nothing about thoroughbreds is no good to you, because what you'll find is they show very subtle pain signs, and you get a lot of instructors who go, no, push them through it, work them harder, and actually they miss some really major things, and you can end up with real trouble on your hands. So I think it's working with people who understand the breed, who are sympathetic. You know, the sort of give it a kick and let it go, it doesn't quite apply to thoroughbreds, I don't think. I personally, I don't think so. So I think you just have to be able to ride sympathetically, and you have to understand what you're feeling underneath you. And I think in that sense, you need a really good instructor behind you who can help you work through just that transitional period, because they have to learn to use totally different muscles, you know, and it's a massive transformation that they have to go through physically to become a riding horse. And that's why I try to teach people about the biomechanics of racing, and we look at the muscles that they use as a racehorse, and then the muscles that they want to use as a riding horse, and the kind of muscles that you want them to use. Well, they've never even used half of them before, and they're not very strong. And you know, racehorses are all off the forehand. They pull from the front and they don't use their back ends. And then we get on as sort of riding horse, you know, equestrians, and we want them to sit down on their hocks, and we want them to lift up through their core, and we want them to round over their back. Well, they've never really done that. You know, they've been as hollow as anything forever. So it takes a lot, you know, just down to things like, because of the shape that they keep in racing, you know, the ligament that holds the spine together is naturally shorter and contracted. So they can't physically stretch over their back. It takes time. And so you have to, I think, by learning what it is about and understanding that the process is different to if you're going to say take on a 4-year-old and break it yourself, because you're starting with a blank canvas there. If you take a 4-year-old off the racing track, you're not starting with a blank canvas. You're starting with something very different, and probably might have a considerable amount of damage to its joints and its back at that point, because there isn't any getting away from the fact that if you break a horse at 18 months to 2 years, those joints aren't fused. They do, you know, have malformations and problems with them. So I think it's just trying to, if you wanted to do it, I think you have to arm yourself with the knowledge rather than hoping for the best. And there are plenty of really good horse people out there who have never owned thoroughbreds and have found themselves in trouble because they've got an unknown beast on their hands because it's so different to what they've had before. So yeah, I just think it's getting the right knowledge from the right people at the right time. And I think if you do that, it's quite easy. You know, there are plenty of retrainers out there who do it really successfully, not because they're geniuses, they just understand the horses, you know, and I know that's probably easy to say, isn't it? You know, there are plenty of people out there who are amazing with horses, they just get it, and some people have it and some people don't. But I don't actually think they're that complicated. I just don't think there's a lot of education and knowledge in the equestrian world about racing. For me, the two industries are very closed. And I deal with racehorse owners all the time, and when I say that to them, they say, yeah, it is. You know, you tell them about advances in equestrian science, and racing yards aren't overly interested. They don't think it's necessarily relevant to them. So it is changing, it's moving. You know, the likes of Phil Kirby and Dan Skelton are amazing horsemen, and they definitely are embracing the new and incorporating a lot of equestrian science into their yards and their training. But you know, if you're looking at some of the older trainers, you know, and their dad taught them, so you can't get away from that sort of genetic way of training and the way that they do it. And you know, they get great results and they love their horses. It's not, you know, it's not a criticism, it's just that the knowledge between the two industries isn't there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is parallels to anything in the horse world there, though, isn't it? Which is, you need the knowledge to know what you're doing. You need to find the right people who've done it before, not the ones that just think they can probably work it out. You know, there are still a lot of people in kind of traditional, in dressage and show jumping and showing and all sorts of areas that actually aren't up to date with the latest of anything because they know the right way. So why would they need to update their CPD or learn something new for the sake of learning it or think about different ways of doing things? So I do think that, you know, actually there's parallels to everything there, but really key, like you say, in racing and in thoroughbreds, because actually it sounds like, to me, what you've said is lovely, which is they are amazingly wonderful breed. They're fantastic and lovely, and they'll give you what it is that you want, as long as you get the right one and as long as you do it the right way. And it's a slightly different way to how you might normally do something. So that's where the nuance comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think once you've got them there, once you've retrained them, and I have to say, I did see something about, somebody put on a thing about retraining, and it's a bit of a buzzword because she'd got this racehorse and somebody said, oh, have you got to retrain it? And actually she'd got a really good one, and she thought, oh, I've just got on it, you know, I haven't got to retrain it at all. And you know, some of them are like that, and maybe retraining is not the right word, but once you actually physically sort of adjust them, you know, like make that transition, they make amazing equestrian horses. They'll be your partner for life because they really want to love you and get loved. And when you first get some of them, that's not obvious. Some of them are quite emotionally shut down, and it can be frustrating because maybe they haven't learned to love because of the environment they're in. And sometimes that can take a year, 18 months to get that love. And you probably do think some days, I don't know why I'm doing this because this horse doesn't even like me, alone love me. You know, I'm throwing everything at it, all my money, all my time. And, you know, they try and bite and kick me. So and that does happen, but some of that is just the way they're conditioned. And the thing about racing, it does happen, is they get pushed to a sort of a cliff edge, and some of them go over the cliff edge where they just don't cope and they do mentally shut down. And if you end up with one that's mentally shut down, it does take a long time to get them back. And sort of some of the things that you find when you feed them, they can be very aggressive when you're putting their feed in. So like in racing, they don't tend to put feeds in stables. What they do is they have turnstiles on the stables. So they throw the cubes in and then they spin the bucket round and it goes into stable. So they're not used to being fed by hand. They don't get a lot of treats or tidbits. It depends on the size of the yard. It's not, everything is a bit of a generalization. You can't, if you've got a small yard with a trainer who's got 30, it's going to be very different from, say, one of the big yards which has got 300. So, but you do find that they've never taken a carrot off somebody and they don't know what it is. So yeah, sometimes these horses get a bit mentally shut down and don't even really know how to interact with people as people expect riding horses to interact with them. And they're not, I don't think you should give up on them. I just think you have to give them the time. And if you give those horses the time, they end up being the ones that are amazing. They're the ones that love you and they will take you around and do anything that you want to do with them. But they just take that a little bit longer to get that trust and that bond with you. So it's horses for courses. But
so it does sound like it's an incredibly rewarding thing to do, but don't take it on lightly. Like if you're going to take a racer off the track, you've got to have time, patience, you've got to go through a learning journey, you've got to surround yourself with the right people, you've got to take it at the pace the horse needs it to do. So if you're someone that wants a horse to go and enjoy grassroots riding club activities and things like that, then perhaps taking one off the track won't give you what you want fast enough or quick enough potentially. You might want to consider whether that's the right option for you, because I think a lot of people do that. They get, certainly I've come across, get an ex-racer, it's got a lovely temperament or whatever, they've got one of those ones that probably just wasn't fast enough or didn't really have that will to go, and they've kind of gone, it's really sweet, turn him out for 6 months or something and then bring him back and go, right, okay, here we go, we're going to start doing riding club stuff now and all these things. And they're teaching them, like you say, they're kind of starting them a bit like they would start restart a 6-year-old or something like that. But actually, even having been turned out for 6 months, their body's not going to suddenly change that much, and they're not going to have learned some of the stuff that maybe a leisure horse might have learned. So yeah, what's your kind of thinking on people that think, oh, it's all right, we'll just turn them away for a bit and then we'll crack on?
Well, I actually don't advise anybody to turn them away unless they have really hit a mental point where they can't cope. One of the real reasons I don't think you should turn a racehorse away is that when you look at spinal x-rays of ex-race horses, the majority have what we call some sort of pathology. Some of it's mild and some of it's severe. And when they're raced, they build quite a lot of quite strong back muscle. It might be short and contracted and not ideally suited for equestrian, but what it does is it protects the spine. And as soon as you drop that back muscle, that spine, all those spine pathologies start to cause pain and irritation, and then you can have some real problems on your hands. So I just think turning them away can be more harmful than keeping them in work. And I don't mean you have to get on and ride them, but you can long rein them, bring them in and make sure they do carrot stretches and sort of belly lift every day to help kind of stretch the spine out and get some suppleness through that back muscle. And that's why I just think if you understood where they came from and understood their whole sort of physical makeup, you would probably think twice about turning them away. I get that there's a big thing that mentally sometimes they need a break, and that's what I mean. You don't need to come in and send them to a dressage competition like in week 2, but I think that bringing them in, say maybe just sticking them on the long reins, taking them for a walk in hand, it's just anything to keep them moving, keep them working. Just say doing sort of belly lifts and carrot stretches can build immense strength. So there was a vet at Animal Health Trust, Rachel Murray, I think her name is. She did a study of creating core strength for horses without ridden work. So she looked at doing groundwork, getting them to walk over poles, long reining them, doing the carrot stretches. She didn't put anybody on any of the horses' backs for 3 months, and she just did a consistent program. And the amount of top line and suppleness she managed to build into those horses' back was incredible. Now, I'm not sure because I can't remember, but because she's based down in Newmarket, I would guess the horses you were working on were thoroughbreds, and they were probably out of racing. One of the reasons most studies out there are on thoroughbreds is because there's such a surplus in the industry. They do get used for these research studies. So it's quite handy to have that information. But yeah, I mean, I as I say, I don't think that's so mentally horrendous for a horse to come in and do a bit of carrot stretching and a bit of long reining and walk over a few poles. You're not taxing them mentally to the point of sending them over the edge. You can build quite a relationship with them and a bond and get them to, you know, do a bit of liberty work. If that's what you're into, you know, they are really adaptable. You know, some of these horses who are out on gallops across Newmarket, Moulton, they're hacking to the gallops. You know, down at Ditchit where Paul Nichols is, I think there's a massive dairy farm. If you come across a milk tanker on one of his horses, they don't bat an eyelid. They're used to it. So there's nothing to say you can't work on other things. And then that's the other thing with racehorses, in my mind, and not everybody agrees with me, but thoroughbreds need to work. They are bred to work, and they do better. It's a bit like having a border collie and not working it. It just goes self-employed and does its own thing. And I just think that's the same with a thoroughbred. If you don't get the physical work into them, you have to work them mentally, because if not, you end up with a monster on your hands. And not all the time, but you know, as I say, it's all generalizations. But I do think that with a thoroughbred, they thrive. They're intelligent, they thrive on that work, and they are probably akin to a border collie in the dog world, that they need something. So as I say, unless you've got a horse that's really, really shut down and really does need to be turned out, I would try and keep it in some sort of work to start with and build it up. But just, you know, what we were saying at the beginning of sort of before you asked that question, be prepared that it's going to take you 2 years. And don't get it and think I'm going to be out doing ROR show champs at Aintree in August, you know, if you're only getting off the track in May, because that's quite a big ask, really.
Cool, thanks. I think that's really useful for people to know, because, you know, anything we can do on here that helps to distill myths or dispel myths, or to, you know, get people thinking about something differently, or to really consider an option, I think really helps people. Because, you know, I mean, obviously my point of view is always from a mindset point of view, from a rider and being confident, being able to perform at their best. But, you know, your teammates make such a difference, and not just the teammates as in your farrier, your saddler, your trainer, but your teammate is in your horse. You know, the two of you have got to be willing, able and happy to perform and understand the task at hand. And, you know, so often communication errors come in, don't they, with horse and rider, when actually we presume the horse knows what we're asking for, and we get annoyed with it, and it gets annoyed back at us because it doesn't know what we're asking for, and everyone gets confused. And that's when we end up with behaviours that then become behaviours that riders don't want to have in their horses. So I think it's just so important that people learn stuff, but that they get the right information from the right places. So if they're thinking, oh yeah, do you know, this is really interesting, I'd love to learn more from Kirsty. I love the fact that you're teaching us it from a biomechanics, from a body perspective, and you're actually a vet physio, so you really do know what you're talking about here. You know, where can they start finding some stuff out about it from you now? Because this is a huge topic, isn't it?
It is huge. I mean, we only started the company in January, so it came about on a bit of a storm, and obviously COVID-19's created some challenges. The plan originally was to do lots of hands-on clinics. So we did the first one at the National Racing College in March, and that was sort of part theory, part practical. And we did we looked at assessing horses, and obviously we're just using the horses there that I used to train the jockeys. So they're still in a race style training program because of the way they are. So it was great because there was a blank canvas and you could just train them. So we still plan to run those hands-on courses, and we do have one booked in October, and we're hoping, you know, there's 20 places, so it's not a huge gathering, but we'll see what that brings. We were just at the process of organising one in Newmarket at the racing school there, and I was supposed to go over to Ireland to talk to racehorse to riding horse in Ireland on the 20th of March, but obviously that got cancelled right at the last minute. So then the plan was to do some online courses, but in time and not necessarily immediately. But because of the situation, we are just put up module 1 of the ex-racehorse online massage course, which just basically the first module covers anatomy, and we look at the joints and the skeleton. And although it's learning some of the basics of any horse, it does look at the thoroughbred, and we look at how racing impacts on certain joints, and also things like why they're high withered and how that's come about via breeding and the performance that that shape of conformation has. And then the second module is on physiology, which we look at the respiratory system. So we look at racehorses that have breathing ops and why they've had them. We look at how racehorses bleed in racing, and they sort of